Hey there. Thanks very much for checking out videos here on YouTube. I do greatly appreciate it. I thought I would do a series on OMVIC. So in Ontario, we have the Ontario Motor Vehicle Council. So those are the folks that basically regulate the licensing requirements for car dealers in Ontario, Canada. Now, I have been in the past in the automotive industry a service manager, service writer, parts clerk, parks manager. I've also been a finance manager. I've also been a accounts receivable on a manufacturer's end. So I'm actually the guy that used to chase around dealers for collecting money on unpaid cars when they used to float a. You normally have a dealer plan or a four. Be the guy that would show up once a month and just review everything. So essentially, that was one of my jobs. Also, I've worked on the sales floor. I've also worked in the finance as far as a finance manager, which is a pretty broad statement from that standpoint. So I thought I would share some of my knowledge on YouTube as far as the process on getting your OMVIC certification. So if you're new to Canada and you're looking for a fast track way of getting to a good middle income or upper level income, usually the automotive industry, the entry level is to get into either a low end service position or to get on the sales floor. So this is just kind of this way of kind of getting through the back door on how to get up into management or how to kind of build your experience and move forward as far as that's concerned. So if you're new to Canada or you're in that 18 to 25 mark and you're looking for a career, you're essentially saying to yourself, geez, I like cars. I'd like to get into that. And maybe you watch quite a few YouTube videos. You think to yourself, geez, I could be that guy. Well, let's talk about that in Southern Ontario. So first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to go into a student manual. Now, I don't think they actually have these anymore. So I think it's all online or they've gone digital with it. So this is a really old book of mine. So again, I think it's essentially the exact same content you'd have online, with the exception of no fancy graphics. You actually have to physically read it. So again, one of those things I would highly recommend if you're going into a car dealership or you're already employed there, is ask one of the senior guys, if it's a nice place that you work at, and say, hey, can I borrow your OMVEC student manual from 10 years ago? Because it's a good read. It's one of those things that if you're in the detail department or you're in another department, you're thinking to yourself, I would like to move into the automotive sales end of it, or at least get a window or a look to see what it's all about. This book will help you out dramatically from that standpoint. I might actually make a version of it myself as like a quick little manual, like a reference guide, because this is a fairly substantial. And if you're just doing the sales portion of it, just to get yourself on the floor to sell cars, you're not covering everything in this. You're only really doing a couple chapters. So if this looks intimidating to you, don't be. It's one of those things where um, if you've got a good high school background, you're going to be able to comprehend this quite well. If you've got a degree of common sense, you're going to be fine. If you've actually bought a car through a dealership in the past, or you've managed to go through the process a couple times already, this is going to really be kind of one of those things where you're going to kind of go, oh, pretty straightforward. So again, something to pick up. Sometimes you'll find these on occasionally listed on eBay as used books. So again, watch for one of those, or just ask a senior sales tech if they've got it. Most of the dealerships, at least the ones where I was kind of middle management or had the opportunity to put something together, I would normally have a library of books. So a new person could come in and say, hey, good news. You're going through your licensing process. Here's a series. You're going to be sitting in the showroom for 8 to 12 hours out of the day. It's not a bad idea between clients to grab a book and do a little reading. It can advance your knowledge, and by advancing that person who's new on the job knowledge. So if you're a sales manager out there, don't be defensive about that. The more they know, the less work you have to do as a manager. So that's one of those things. The way I looked at it was kind of like, if you know how to do the basic sales process and you've worked out a system where you can effectively go, okay, we're starting from point A and we're going to go to point B. And then we're going to go from point B to point C, then point C to point D. It's not a complicated process by any stretch of the imagination. There's only really a few steps to actually selling the vehicle, especially if you're on the sales floor. So again, don't get Don't get overly concerned about the amount of paperwork or some of the stuff that folks will throw at you and say, hey, this is going to be a complicated task. It really isn't. And the most part, you're working with people. And as long as you have the capacity to communicate and the ability to kind of shut up, I hate to say that, but a lot of times you just need to listen, and a client will actually lead you to a sale. It's one of those things where a lot of salespeople will try and push a product or try and work a deal. And it's kind of one of those things where if someone has walked through the door, they're kind of already pre-qualified themselves as needing a vehicle. Now, it might not be today, but it's going to be tomorrow. And they're just looking for either they've done the research online, they're looking for a test drive to touch and feel the product and to get an introduction or a sense of the type of person they're going to deal with. Are you going to be a pain to kind of go through the process with? And if you are, they're going to look at it and kind of go, not so much at that place, right? So again, I'm going to try and delve into that a little bit as well, as far as how the sales process works and the steps that need to be taken, not to necessarily close every sale, because you're not going to do that. And you might as well acknowledge that. You're never going to meet every client's 100% expectation. You may not have the right product. You may not have the right finance package. You may not have the right dealership. You might have approached the client incorrectly. There's a whole host of things that can cause a sale to go south, especially if you're new. So it's one of those things where we're going to recap some of the things that I've gone through in the past, and hopefully some of the things that I've experienced will help you move forward. So let's talk a little bit about why you'd want to get into car sales or why you want to go into the automotive industry, especially in today's market. So we've come out of COVID. The car industry is basically tanked, and then it's built back up, tanked again. There are some brands that are on the fence post as to whether or not they'll be around in the next 5 years. Tariffs are coming out, so that's going to cause a whole host of things as far as potential issues in the automotive industry that's definitely going to affect the day-to-day or the sales process. And the sales process has changed dramatically as well. Again, with the online component that has become rather dominant in what I describe as the newer generation. So if you're under 30, you're very competent and you've done your internet research because that's just second nature to you. And you're going to go, okay, well, I already know what I want to buy based on reviews. And basically, essentially, it's going to go look at that. If you're looking at a Corolla, all you want to do is physically go touch the Corolla and make sure it's physically there while your money gets transferred, right? So pretty straightforward. If you're in a little older generation, sometimes you like to feel that you're getting your handheld, you're getting a little cappuccino, gone for a test drive, you try 3 or 4 different cars. The sales guy's been really pleasant. They made a real event out of it. They're going to put a bow on your car as you're driving out, that type of deal. So again, there's a spread between expectations when it comes to buyers, as far as that's concerned. So again, the automotive industry can be challenging. It can be fun. It can be entertaining. It can be a grind as well, and it can also be brutal financially. It can also be a tough run for someone who's just getting out there. So who would want to go out and become a car salesman? Well, you have to be a bit of an entrepreneur. And that's the way I looked at it when I first started. Coming up, I was basically, how would I describe it? Grew up in Hamilton, Ontario, moved around a lot, single mom, not a lot of cash in the family, not a lot of opportunities there because of that. So again, kind of a weird or unusual relationship with my father as far as that's concerned. So again, nothing really paid forward from the previous generation to say, hey, here's an opportunity to get moving and to kind of, say to yourself, here's a set of keys, here's the business, the doors are open, good news, you're in a convenience store. Nothing really like that, right? So it's one of those things where if you're starting from the ground up, you don't really have a lot to draw from. Getting into the automotive field of it or getting into sales is a great opportunity for somebody out there who goes, I would really like to open up a business, but unfortunately, due to regulations in Ontario or due just the way circumstances have kind of lined up, you don't have the funds to really go out there and say, okay, I can open up a coffee shop or I can open and when I say coffee shop, I mean by entry level businesses. There isn't anything really out there for you to get into because you just don't have the experience, the background, or the money to do it. So automotive is going to get you in and allow you to negotiate. So it's going to teach you how to deal with people. It's also going to teach you about overhead costs. You're also going to understand the idea of what it costs to be at a desk. your day to day, right? You're going to get an idea what product cost is, what ROI is. Basically, you're going to get a good run or a good foundation to be able to push forward, to be able to apply that to another business. So if you decide to say to yourself, look, automotive isn't really what I've intended to be or what I want to go into, but you want to say to yourself, look, I want to get that opportunity, at least try to start your own business or to try to start your own process to be able to allow you to do that. Right. Now, keep in mind that this is a live broadcast. It's a YouTube studios. I don't script this. So it's basically just a frank discussion to kind of give you an idea where we're going as far as that's concerned. At some point, I hope to move this into a podcast series on OMVIC car sales in Ontario. Probably do a series of 12, kind of like how to get your license, how the process starts, and so forth. Right. So if you could subscribe, that would be great. If put a little thumbs up, that would be wonderful as well. If you're in the automotive industry, or maybe you were in the automotive industry, you moved off, and maybe you're in car insurance now, or a completely unrelated business, and you say, that gave me my start to allow the footprint to move into this direction. That would be really nice to hear from. Again, if you're out there starting out, this is probably going to be a real eye opener for you. I don't work for a car franchise. I don't work for a dealership. I'm going to basically just tell you how it was back in the day. It probably relates to today's industry, but it'll give you an eye opener as far as things to look for and things to kind of tailor towards moving into the car business. So right off the bat, so why would you want to sell cars? Well, in all likelihood, it's because you want to make money. That's probably it, right? That's probably one of the features. You probably like cars, and that's a nice item to do as well. You're probably got a particular brand you're in love with, or you're a little bit of a fanatic on that, or maybe you're hoping down the road to open up your own garage, or maybe you're a tinkerer of sorts and you just like to be around the automotive industry. Maybe you like retail sales. And if you are in other retail sales, typically the automotive end of it is the upper echelon. So if you're in shoe sales, or you're selling appliances, or you're selling electronics, usually that automotive is that next level up prior to getting into things like real estate or some sort of a banking service, things along that line. The automotive sales end of it is typically perceived as being that upper end of retail sales. So again, with that, it brings a few little things you need to be aware of. It requires a little more attention, a little more skill set than if you were just working a day to day in a mall kiosk, or if you're working in a women's clothing store, or you're working in a shoe store. These are all things that are kind of, they're tough in their own ways. And I've worked in other retail avenues as well. So I do know that there's different approaches, different things that happen in that end that can be an issue, but you're never going to be able to make as much money as you could selling cars. Now there's a mix to that. So in other words, you have to find the right dealership, the right pay plan. You also have to find the right team that you're working with. And that's a key thing. So let's talk a little bit about the money, because I know that's what most people want. And I try to keep these things at 30 minutes. We're running to about 15. So let's start with the dollars and cents. So traditionally, when you start off at a dealership in Ontario, actually it's spread throughout Canada. I did a little run in Alberta for a little bit. You're usually looking at about in between 15 to about 35% commission on what they call the gross, so the profit margin on the car. So that sounds like it's pretty competitive, but usually it's a stepping system. So in other words, if you sell 4 cars, which if you're a new person, you can take the pressure off a little bit. You're not going to go out there and start selling 30 cars instantly. You're not going to sell, even some of the top guys out there, and if they're in a smaller market, are not going to hit that 30 car mark. So take a little breath back, because I know a lot of folks will get out there and they'll go, well, I'm going to hit that 4 running. We're going to make tons of money. But no, you're probably going to start off in that 4 to maybe 12 range. That's kind of the comfortable area. Now, most dealerships will have a tiered commission structure. So usually your 4th car is going to be anything below that. It's usually 15 or 20%. Okay. Now, there's a base as far as what they're going to pay you. Now, in Ontario, the base is kind of a minimum wage based on hours. So they basically say, hey, it's 40 hours at minimum wage. It's It's not really a working wage. It's not something you could actually survive on if you were in the GTA or anywhere else, essentially. It's just enough to kind of keep you starving a little bit, right? So that four car mark is usually at 15 to 20% range. Once you get beyond that fifth car, usually around 20%. And if you go to past 10, it can go to about 25. So you can kind of see that's where the tiering is. Now, each dealership plays those numbers a little bit differently, depending on the location, also the dealer principal. If they came up in the car business and if they were on the floor selling cars initially, usually you're going to find that those guys are going to have a little better pay plan or a little more realistic approach to it. So you want to find a dealership that when you do a little research on it, you'll find that not only was the person that owns the dealership um, an owner or a dealer principal, he's also going to be the guy that may have started out washing cars 20 years ago and just built himself up to the point where he became management. Then he ended up buying the place. And by buying it, most of the dealer principals, at least the ones that I've experienced, have it hasn't been handed to them. They've either taken over the debt or they've made an arrangement with the previous owner where they may still have ownership issues. So in other words, they're still going to have the property may not be theirs. It may be the original dealer. The original dealer might be a partner that you don't see on the sales floor very often or hardly ever, right? So the way that's made up, and we'll talk about that a little later on how people kind of get in and purchase a dealership. We'll talk about that. Probably it's a long way from where we are at this point. But if that's the intent, we'll talk about that so you get an idea where that's going. So when you're out there looking for a job, you want to find an established dealership with an established brand, with a pay structure that reflects a sales team's knowledge on how the process works. So with that said, if you get into a dealership where they have a 3 month grace period, where they're going to say, look, for the next 90 days, because you're new, you're still trying to get your licensing in place. You're still trying to run around a little bit to get a familiar feel where the keys are, where the cars are, what are the trim lines and things along that line. And they're going to give you training. So you still have to go through your Ford programs, your GM programs to kind of get an idea what's available to you. You're going to have a hard time even putting together the initial sales contract to begin with. So the expectation of you rolling in there and saying, hey, good news, guys, I'm going to start, boom, right off the bat, being your top sales guy is pretty rare. And if you find that person standing right next to you or beside you, usually they're twits and they're not last long. So just be aware of it. Usually when you see that on the sales floor where somebody comes in and go, hey, I'm going to change the world and get everything rolling, you want to be able to roll with it a little bit. So take your 3 months or your 90 days if the dealership is allowing you to do that to get familiar with everything. You want to get a good flow. You want to get a good sales process. They're going to give you a small program or a schedule to follow. And initially, you want to do that. Follow their programs and their schedules. A lot of the older sales guys won't do that because they've already got their own little system in place. They may have been doing it for 10 years and they may go, okay, well, I'm not going to follow my sales calendar. I'm not going to follow this because they've already got a certain number coming in through the dealership. You don't have that. So you want to be able to do the CRM and you want to be able to look back and say to yourself over that 90 days, this has been the process. These are my points of contact. These are my follow-ups. This has been the process. And you also want to be able to say to yourself, what is my closing rate? And you want to be able to step back and hopefully you've got a sales manager or a business manager in the finance office that'll sit down with you and say, hey, these are the areas that perhaps you need to work on um, in the beginning. Like it's just one of those things, kind of hat out. You want to be able to get all those comments in there. You want to be able to get all that structure. You want to be able to get not necessarily criticism, but what you want to do is find out where the shortcuts are. And the easiest way to do that is to talk to a senior manager. I always used to go to the finance office when I started out. I always found the senior guys when it came to sales and working the floor, they were so busy. Basically, I would describe it as a daycare center, um, fighting over who sold what to where, who talked to that guy. It becomes a whole debate, right? So they're usually preoccupied just putting fires out, trying to put deals together, right? So you got to remember everything funnels into that sales manager's office. So usually they just don't have the time or the ability to kind of pull you aside and really talk to you. It's just the nature of it. So a finance manager, however, because they're not really doing the day-to-day sales floor thing, they're basically doing credit applications and processing documentation. They have their own sales process as well when it comes to product lines. And usually they're drawn from the sales floor. So you need to start on the sales floor before you can become a finance manager or a finance representative of the dealership. So it's one of those things where there's a process to that. And most of them were on the floor already, or they've got some experience in there, and they deal with all the other sales staff. So they hear all the little rumors and things like that. So they're good folks. You come in and talk to and say, "Hey, I'm new. I'm looking for somebody to help me out a little bit." And a little critique: is my sales contract legible? Do you understand it? Is there something here that would be a shortcut or a way of helping me move forward or to help speed the process up for a client? Is there something that I'm missing here? And most times, because they've got a little bit of time, they're usually not overworked. There's usually a team in there on top of it. They're usually pretty good about saying, "Hey, yeah, you know what? Here's what I would probably do," or a little review to say, "Hey, this might help you out a little bit," as far as that's concerned. And they're nice because they're a little step away, so they're not going to really, pull a whip out and give you a hard time. They're going to really just basically help you out a little bit. So look for that. So you got your pay structure is basically a commission based on gross. Now, gross is subjective, and this is where it becomes a real issue when you're looking at pay scales at certain dealerships. And if you're out there looking on the internet and you're looking at jobs, and you go, "Geez, well, it looks like that one Ford dealership is always hiring." There's a reason for that. Their pay structure might sound good. In other words, they might go, "Yeah, it's a step process. You get your 90 days. We get you licensed up. Everything is all taken care of. We get you on the desk, get you rolling." But then you look at it, and you kind of go, "Okay, well, at the end of the day," and they might be a good dealership to start with. In other words, they'll get you in the door, you can get licensed and get the process for 6 months or a year, right? Then you have to start looking around for a better place. When you're looking at gross, the dealer controls it. It's kind of like the house always wins. So you look at a new car. New car is really easy. Car costs X amount. There's a PDI and freight addition to it. There's might be a lot pack, which is where they basically incorporate the cost of washing and maintaining the car, or lot damage, dings, scratches that might happen while the car is getting moved around. That could be $250 to $500 that they take out of the gross, right? Um, PDIs typically you don't see that on the sales floor anymore, but the older dealerships will do that, where they will charge back a PDI into the deal, so a pre-delivery inspection. So that's kind of like getting it prepped and ready for the sale. So those are things you can't control. Now the other one is write downs. So a lot of times, as a vehicle gets older on the lot, there's a cost to it. In other words, they're carrying that car through a finance contract. So every quarter, they've got to review the car, and they have to say to themselves, "Oh, okay, well, that car costs us 2% or 1% of carrying costs." So they have to either reduce the price of the car at a loss. So in other words, they got to be able to say, "Okay, I can write that car down on the expense side of it," which they don't do. So um, at least no dealer that I've ever worked with has ever done that. They'll reduce the profit margin. So you follow where I'm getting at. So if you're looking at a car and you're selling it on the lot and it's been there 180 days, well, that profit margin might be very narrow. And then you start putting in the lot pack, and you start putting in a few other little things that get kind of tucked in there. Well, next thing you know, you've gone from an average commission of maybe $200 to $300 on a car, for kind of your bread and butter, straight deal, no mystery to it, some negotiations. But you're going to look at it and kind of go, "Okay, well, now that's down to 175. That's because it's considered old stock. Now, some dealers will provide you with a bonus. Well, they'll say, "Okay, anything over 90 days or 180 carries a $50 or $100 bonus to kind of offset that." And they're hoping that that'll motivate you to move the older inventory. Now, older inventory usually isn't based on motivation. It's not you, the sales guy, not selling that car. Usually it's because it's either a trim line that isn't very popular, or it's a sales incentive on that particular line and they rotate out that hasn't been very successful. So a good example would be an F-150 would be a good idea. So if you've got an F-150 that was at the beginning of the year model line, and it ran out of its incentives. So in other words, the program for finance is gone and it's now moved on to the newer model. Well, that old carryover model, if you're financing it, doesn't make any sense. You'd want to go to the next model year, right? Because you're going to get a preferred interest rate. So the person that's going to buy that, not necessarily an old car, but a car that's old in inventory and doesn't carry the financial incentives that the new car does, which is still a new car, you have to find the cash buyer for that, right? Or someone who's doing a lot of credit or another type of financing, right? So a person that would do some financing would prefer to go into a model that you've already taken all the incentives out because now it's just a cash number, right? So those are things that you got to watch for when you're on the sales floor as far as how that is concerned. Now it comes down to individual deals. So what does the average sales guy make on a single sale? And that varies dramatically. And some guys will tell you, "Oh yeah, it's oodles and oodles of money," right? And yeah, sometimes it can be. You can get into a vehicle that might have a $4,000 or a $5,000 gross in it, which would be like a high. I want to put this. Might be like a Lincoln Navigator with all the programs kind of removed, and you've managed to etch out $7,000 in profit. That's very doable because the car is worth 80,000, so $90,000. So a $7,000 commission, not a commission, but a profit margin in that would make sense. It may even be more than that. And if you're looking at it from a general rule of thumb, any small retailer would be trying to get 10 to 20% return on their inventory. And if you're selling shoes, that's what you're shooting for, if not more, right? So they're in the exact same boat in business. They're there to make money, so the gross should be there. So on the higher end cars, you can make a little more money from that standpoint just because the margins the way they're set up. Now, the dilemma is that if you're in a franchise dealership, you're not only going to get the high end cars, but you're going to get that bread and butter, run of the mill, standard vehicle that they sell a ton of, but there's a cap on what can be earned. In other words, you're not going to get a $60,000 entry level car. You're going to get a car that's $23,000 to $32,000. And with that, if you had a 10% rule as far as what your profit should be, then you're looking at about a $3,000 gross. Then you take your lot pack off and a few other little things. Now you're down to around $1,700, right? Then you take 25% of that if you've managed to meet your quota. So you're going to walk out with potentially $300 on that sale. That's how that process works. If you're selling a Mitsubishi Mirage, which is a good example, Mitsubishi Mirage, well, they're 14,995 plus freight, PDI, and so forth. So you're about 21 with a few little options on it. But at that point, the Mirage is an entry level, really low level car when it comes to commission. You're looking to make 150 or maybe even less on that particular car. So they're volume items. You're meant to just be able to say, "Hey, here's the keys. Let's go through the process. Good news. This is the payment. Boom, out the door." It's not really meant to be a car that's meant to be overly sold or spent a lot of time on, which is a bit of a flaw in that approach. Because what I've always found, at least when I've sold cars, is that one person that buys that brand new car, well, he's going to end up talking to a neighbor, talking to a buddy at work about his experience, and next thing you know, he's going to have to give a recommendation to somebody, and that person who's he's talking to might look at it and kind of go, "Well, I'm looking for a pickup truck. I'm not looking for that entry level car." So those are those referrals that work really well. So you really should treat each sale with a set of white gloves. It's an exciting process for everybody. It's essentially a new car. There should be a process involved. So in other words, don't get too enthralled with what you're making. You're going to get some highs and lows. It's going to average out at the end of the year anyways. So it's one of those things where it can eat you up a little bit by chasing that big dollar item. What you want to do is basically be as receptive and welcoming as possible. So what can a first year car salesperson make in Ontario? Well, if you're in the outskirts of the GTA or you're in a small town, you're going to struggle a little bit because the big dealers are going to try to envelop you a little bit. It's going to be a tough world today for you with the internet. In other words, it's going to be a price sensitive move. When you're looking at the GTA, it's going to be volume. So it all depends on the location where you're at. Most new car sales guys, if they are on the new car end of it, make less than the used car sales guys. So you want to find a dealership that allows you to go back and forth from new to used, ideally in a perfect world. There are two different approaches when it comes to selling. So something to think about from that standpoint, two different knowledge bases essentially. Um, but you're going to break probably that $30,000 mark for the first year. That's Canadian. So we're talking, it's a thin existence, right? Second year, if you've managed to maintain a client base and you've managed to keep your contacts, well, you're not going to get that person rolling out of a car in the first year, but you might get their sister, you might get their brother-in-law, you might get a coworker, you might get a couple referrals off them to be able to build off that initial base that the dealership provided you, right? So it means that you're going to see a little bit of a marked increase, plus your skill set's going to be a little bit better. And plus, you're going to have a little more knowledge of the inventory. You're also going to have a little more knowledge of what the finance packages are available. And you'll be able to answer a little more in the way of questions as far as the second year is concerned. So you're probably going to be just under that 40 mark. We're not talking huge numbers, but we're comfortably in that range. Now, if you're going to move into a third year guy is usually going to make around that 40 to 50 mark if he's managed to stay consistent, follows with his CRM, keeps everything kind of nice and smooth, and doesn't have anything in the way of interruptions through the year. In other words, just he's managed to find that sales process. He's managed to find that little step where he can actually draw from the sales floor effectively. He can answer phone calls. He can respond to emails properly. He can do a call to action. He can write a bill of sale up effectively. Knows how to calculate interest payments and things along that line. That third year guy is usually going to do okay. He's about that average position moving into guys that have been there forever because there's a plateau essentially. Once you get past that third year, now you're getting into the guys that starting to go, okay, well, I'm into that fourth year. I put 25,000 K a year on the car. I'm at 100,000 kilometers. Warranty runs to 100,000 K. Finance contracts are usually 5 years, right? So he's at that point where he's got a little bit of equity in the car. He's got enough where maybe he can move out. So that's where you have to start working your phones, sending out an email and saying, hey, look, you're at that 100,000 K mark where you're at 97 K. You're just about out of warranty. Your car is worth X amount. So there's some equity there to be able to transfer to the new one. In other words, there's some positive money to go to allow you to get into another vehicle with warranty coverage and not have to worry about doing big major service intervals, which is the way I used to sell my cars to clients. I would say, look, you're in that fourth or fifth year. You're coming up to a tire replacement. Maybe you need two front ones. You're going to start doing brake work. Things that aren't going to be covered in warranty are going to start coming up as far as repairable items. They're kind of things like timing belts, things along that line. So it might be time if you're just the client that goes, I pay X amount per month. It's to get me to and from work. I like to have something that's a little nice. They're going to just rotate, and they're going to rotate every 4 to 5 years. And as long as you've set up that ability to be able to say, hey, you know what, I've stayed in contact with you. I've done the after sales. Service department has been decent to them. Usually they're going to come back and get a car off you. And if they're not buying your car, they're going to a different brand because of needs and wants. You have to have that conversation. Say, hey, look, I work at the Ford dealership, which I did at one point, and you want to go look at a Volkswagen. Well, what Volkswagen do you want? And then you're going to go off to your leasing department. You're going to say, hey, look, I've got these nice folks. They're really decent. They've been really good to us. They bought a car. Let's help them out and find them a good deal on a Volkswagen. And most dealerships today are now interconnected through the auctions, and they will end up calling a local Volkswagen dealer or a dealer rep and say, hey, look, we need to get a Touareg for a client who is really set on getting a Touareg. And then usually you can end up processing and helping that person getting into that car, which is the way to go, is try and maintain your client base as best as you can. Same thing with specialty items. So a lot of guys will come in and they'll go, oh, I want to get into a Porsche now. You're not a Porsche dealer, but you know what? You do have access to that. So those are things you need to rely on. So hopefully this helped you out. We're coming up to about 35 minutes. And this, again, is the introduction. So I'm going to start going through each chapter. On the OMVIC student manual from way back in the day, we're going to talk about the process of getting a license and things you need to learn before you get into the whole let's register and find a dealership to follow up with. Okay, so hopefully that helps you out a little bit. Have a pleasant and enjoyable day. And again, please subscribe. I'd greatly appreciate it.